Please, I'd like to introduce Harold Kella. Harold is going to be introducing Mark, who will be our keynote lunch speaker. And, you know, we've just been able to understand and learn so much that's so critical to our people. So there's just awesome things that we can bring back to when you get back home and share with the people that you're working with. But again, Harold Kella is the executive chair of the First Nations Financial Management Board. Harold's a member of the Squamish First Nation, and after many years of experience in international business, he worked with the Squamish Nation as a negotiator in areas of economic development, land management, and finance, and served 8 years in the Squamish Council. He has also acted as an advisor and an arbitrator for the First Nations in Western Canada. And Harold serves as the executive chair of the First Nations Financial Management Board, supporting First Nations financial management and accountability and development. He's currently a member of the Fortes BC as chair of the audit committee. Harold's also a member of the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association and has been awarded the designation as Certified Aboriginal Financial Manager. So thank you, Harold Kella.
Yes, retire. I'm afraid of that. Is that more?
Can I have your attention, please? Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the lunch. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mark. He's the co-founder and partner of Genuine Wealth Incorporated. He's an economist. I just told him that I have a son who's an economist, and as an accountant, we're on this earth to keep them honest. He's an economist specializing in the measuring of well-being and happiness of communities and organizations. He's the co-founder and partner of Genuine Wealth Incorporated and the Genuine Wealth Institute, whose mission is to enable the development of flourishing economies and enterprises of well-being based on Mark's model called Genuine Wealth. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Economics of Happiness, Building Genuine Wealth, which was published in May of 2007, and second publishing in 2009. The book was released in China in 2010, the first foreign translation. In 2008, his book won 2 awards, the gold medal in the category of Conscious Business and Leadership at the Los Angeles Nautilus Book Awards, and a bronze medal in the category of Economics at the Axiom Book Awards in New York. In 2008, Alberta Venture Magazine named him as one of Alberta's 50 most influential people. Mark has dedicated the past 25 years of his life to developing new tools for measuring well-being, quality of life, so as to help enable communities and businesses to flourish and remain resilient. He developed the Genuine Wealth model to provide governments, First Nation communities, corporations with a practical tool for measuring and managing communities' assets to ensure sustainable and flourishing and resilient futures. So join me in welcoming Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you for having me today. I come from Edmonton, and I'm very pleased to be with you today and share some of my ideas and my thoughts about how to think about this issue of economic development, LNG specifically, and how it actually affects what I think is the new economic paradigm based on well-being and happiness. And my book I wrote in 2007 as a roadmap for helping individuals, communities, businesses to begin to think about a new bottom line, what I call well-being. So I'm going to walk you through some of my many slides. My book had some wonderful endorsers, including Roy Romanow, who some of you know. I don't know if Bob Ray's here, but I've also had the pleasure of advising Paul Martin when he was finance minister on rethinking the way we measure progress. Because currently our economic indicators focus primarily on money, and the money metrics are divorced from what we truly value in our hearts. And I've had the pleasure working with First Nations from Nunavut to recently with the Polynesian people in Tahiti to reground the economic system in your traditional values. Two years ago, some of my friends came to me, including young Dominic Michaud, who's now working for the Gates Foundation in New York, working on the poverty project for Bill Gates, got together and said, we really love what you've written here in the book. We need to bring this to a market that I think is hungry for this idea of well-being. And so our mission has become to measure what matters for well-being. So we're a group of consultants, economists, business people, and politicians trying to advance this idea that well-being will be the new paradigm. One of my great heroes in this drama of economics, and economics has been the dominant, I call economics the theology of our time. Since World War II, we've focused primarily on measures of progress called the gross domestic product. But as Bobby Kennedy said in 1968, the gross national product doesn't measure the things that make life worthwhile, including the joy of our children's play or the value of nature. So how could this metric, which has been around since World War II, still continue to dominate the economic consciousness of our decision making, including our cost-benefit analyses that we use in government, that Treasury Board thinks about when they think about LNG. They think about everything in terms of dollars and cents and tend to ignore things that have no market value, including nature. There are some economists, including Joseph Stiglitz, who's former senior economist at the World Bank, who's saying that the gross domestic product is in fact failing to measure the things that make life worthwhile, and we need to develop a new accounting system to counter that focus. In 2001, I worked on something called the Genuine Progress Indicator for Alberta as an alternative indicator of progress that measures things like the value of wetlands, the value of our time, the value of our discourse in political discourse. And in this graphic, you can see the Alberta GDP has risen nicely since 1961 and continues to rise, but the Genuine Progress Indicator, 50 indicators of well-being, has lagged and remained rather stagnant. So this rising tide of economic progress in Alberta has not lifted all the boats of our households, the well-being of our households. I was hired in 2008 by the chief economist of the city of Edmonton to develop a similar type of accounting for the well-being of Edmonton as a way of guiding the city's budgets and strategic planning, to think about well-being as the more comprehensively. And here's Edmonton's GDP, the blue line, and the index of well-being, the red line, for the city of Edmonton. So all of us have a dream. I had a dream. My students said I should write this book. I didn't want to write this book, but I felt I had to. I guess I was compelled to. And so when I finally sat myself down, I crafted this thing in about 2 months of writing time, which seemed impossible. But the dream is to build a new economy of well-being. And I'm going to walk you through what that looks like, what that means with respect to this specific conversation today. You know, economists do dominate, I think, I call them the high priests of our society, because economics is the fundamental basis by which all decisions are made. And yet, most economists have forgotten that the word economy comes from the Greek word oikosnomia, meaning household management. So my friend Val here, Napoleon, she knows my wife Jen. Jen, every household has a CHO, a Chief Happiness Officer. And our children are not our shareholders, they're our careholders. And if we start to think about households as a fundamental building block of society and communities, we start to rethink everything. We think about corporations not just as corporate interests in terms of shareholders, but we're all careholders in the commonwealth of the nation. And I'm just a money hunter. When I was working with the Inuit in 2003, I phoned home. My daughter Renee was 5, and she says, "What do you do anyways, Dad?" And I said, "I sell ideas." And she says, "Don't they have their own ideas?" And I said, "We do, but we're stronger when we share our ideas." The word ecology, I'm an ecological economist. That means I think about the economy as a wholly owned subsidiary of the natural system, the natural world. The word ecology means the logic or the knowledge of the household. This guy in the painting here and the guy with the beard, you may recognize the guy with the beard is Leonardo da Vinci, and the other guy is Luca Pacioli. These two men are the fathers of modern accounting. So any accountants in this room have ever studied these guys. Now the interesting thing, so in 495 they write a book called it's Summa Arithmetica. It is a treatise on double entry bookkeeping. Now these guys said that all wealth comes from God, comes from the Creator. So when we account for things, we're accounting for the effects we're having on the gifts that we're given. So think about accounting in a different light now. Now Luca never defined the word profit. In fact, there's no clear definition accounting for the word profit. And the balance sheet was one of the most important things. Taking inventory, which meant taking an assessment of the well-being conditions of your household and the business, was critical to wise business people. In Venice at the time, there were guild societies, businesses working cooperatively together. Well, my book is also called The Economics of Happiness, and it seems like happiness has become a very common theme these days. This is the Dalai Lama who says, the purposes of our lives is the pursuit of happiness, is happiness. Of course, the Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what is happiness anyways? Well, the king of Bhutan, a young king, took over from his father, said, we are going to lead the nations in advancing a new economic paradigm based on well-being and happiness. I was with the Prime Minister in New York at the UN last year, and we challenged the rest of the world to come to the table and to advance this new paradigm. Unfortunately, neither the Obama administration or Harper administration was present at the UN meeting, which was very disappointing, even though Canadians have contributed greatly to this conversation. I believe we're in the midst of an asset revolution, or devolution, in which wealth is being redefined in terms of well-being. Let me explain why I think that's true. I came up with the idea of called genuine wealth. Words are powerful, and when we speak these words, they have a spirit behind them, an energy. Turns out the word genuine, of course, means to be authentic, to live according to our values. So I don't use that word lightly, because it's important. All the decisions we made, I heard the conversation this morning at this session on economic development, was that we have to ground our decisions about LNG or whatever in our values, our shared values. Now, when I studied the origins of the words, the word wealth, I was stunned to learn, means the conditions of well-being. It's an old English word, 13th century. So the word health and wealth are close cousins. Think about that. So when I thought about that, I said, this idea of wealth, going back to the origins, changes the game, changes the nature of our conversation. It expands this notion of wealth to include all the things that contribute to life. The word happiness, my book editor, actually my first book editor was my mother-in-law. She was terrifying. She was a PhD in English. And she said, you have to define every word. So I go to my dictionary, my etymological dictionary, and the word happiness in the Greek means well-being of spirit. You could say it's spiritual well-being, but broken down into the two words, EU, the letters EU means well-being, and daimonia means spirit. Aristotle said, happiness comes from a sense of well-being resulting from achieving excellence in the fulfillment of one's functions. That was the Greek definition, and it still holds today, in my opinion. This idea of measuring genuine wealth or doing genuine wealth assessments for communities and organizations is based on the science of happiness and well-being. There's a lot of psychologists studying what makes people happy, and so our model is based on the idea that there are at least 5 aspects of well-being. The green circle is the environment. Without nature, we would have nothing. On the lower parts, we have wealth, which is material and financial well-being. We all need to work and to have income. The right side, we have health, which is physical and mental well-being. And then in the middle, we have relationships. And all of us know that relationships are what holds us together. and then ultimately we have happiness or spiritual well-being. The science of happiness says 50% of your happiness comes from your genetics and the conditions of your upbringing. So by the time you're 8 to 12, you've achieved a sort of happiness set point. Only 10% of your happiness comes from your life circumstances, including how much money you make, how much education you have, and where you live. And the best news of all, 40% comes from your relationships or intentional activities. So we could spend a lot more time in our economy thinking about optimizing and maximizing relationships, the strength of relationships. Also interesting, the happiness curve or the happiness ratings in life looks like this. It actually looks like a smiley face. Your happiness about until you get to puberty, and then you start to fall into the trough and you hit bottom, rock bottom, about 45, because that's when you've probably paid off your mortgage, which in French means a death pledge. And then you come crawling out of it and you ride in the sunset in your 70s, if you make it that long. Economists have been studying, some have been mapping happiness and income, and we can show here that the number of very happy people in the United States has been falling steadily since that last, one of the outer points in 1950, even though incomes have been rising. So one would suggest that more money isn't buying more happiness. In fact, I think there's more depression and there's more negative effects of an economy of growth than what we had in the 1950s. So what makes people happy? Being engaged in life, being curious, feeling life as a flow, personal development. These are all things psychologists are saying make us happy. Well, what makes for the happiest communities in Canada? So a recent study, happiness has never been studied in Canada. Isn't that weird? We talk about value, we talk about quality of life. And I know, having worked for Ralph Klein years ago, we never asked Albertans, what do you love about Alberta? What do you love? Why do you stay here? So what makes happy communities in Canada? Well, number one, a strong sense of belonging to local communities. The smaller the community, generally the happier the people, a stronger sense of belonging. Number two, perceived mental health. So your own impressions of your mental well-being is number two. Number three, being physical activities. Number four, a stress-free life. Number five, being in relationship, being married or being in any healthy relationships, number five. Now, a knock on happiness is being a recent immigrant. We found Toronto had the lowest rate of happy people, and Sherbrooke and Trois-Rivières had the highest. So why would that be? Well, they say because Toronto has a lot of new immigrants, and immigrants don't necessarily feel welcome, at least immediately. So that's a knock on happiness. Number seven is being unemployed. We're all meant to work. Work brings us dignity. So unemployment is a killer of happiness. And a big chill on happiness is losing your spouse or losing your job. So when I do this work with communities, we always go into, I will talk about two examples, one with the Inuit, one with the Ktunaxa Nation in Cranbrook. But we always ask the questions, what do you love about your community? In the town of Olds, Alberta, we asked this question last spring, and people said our most important value is community, our smallness, our small town, and the people. The word value actually means to be strong or worthy from the Latin word valorum. So when we talk about values, we have to, again, go back to the origins of the word, to be strong or worthy. In this model, I believe there are 5 forms of assets in a community, or 5 capitals, and I'll walk you through them. Now this tree, if it represents the 5 assets, is grounded in virtue. The roots are the virtues and the values are the branches. I'm a forester as well, so I think in terms of trees and how trees and forests operate and function. Our first form of capital is human capital. That includes our skills, our aspirations, our longings. This is making tea with some of my Inuit friends when I was up there a few years ago. I've also been quite intrigued by the notion of the person being the 4 aspects in the medicine wheel: spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional, and driven through time by volition or free will. And the Inuit elders said, you know, part of the issue with teen suicide was an imbalance in the spiritual dimension of the youth medicine wheel. So the idea that the wheel of our being needs to be balanced is important. When we think about education, actually the word education comes from the Latin, meaning to draw forth what is already within you. But the Minister of Education in Alberta didn't know that. He still doesn't know that. So what does it mean when we think about the learner as the child born, you know, when, you know, my friend Lewis Cardinal in Edmonton said, you know, the Cree have a saying that every child born is an answer to a prayer. And I thought, that's interesting. So what is the prayer that we were born into? And how does our medicine wheel, the four aspects of our being, develop over time as we go through the schooling system? We're spiritual well-beings, or spiritual beings. This great horned owl flew at me on Blackfoot country a few years ago. I was trying to take her picture. She wasn't very happy with me. But what are the gifts of our spirit, of the spirit? Well, we could think about ourselves that we have many different assets, personal assets. Some of us may be great painters, great givers to elders, or good economists or accountants. We all have different gifts, and we need to honor those. The second form of capital is called social capital. These are the relationships and networks we build with each other. And some of these can be measured in terms of our sense of belonging, as we did with studying the happiest communities in country. Enduring relationships and places of belonging are key to increasing our social capital. And then there's natural capital. This is where I get hired a lot to study things like the well-being of watersheds. This is a map of Canada's watersheds, part of the Canadian Index of Well-being we developed with Roy Romanow, which was released 2 years ago, to show which watersheds are the healthiest in terms of water quality. And the red ones, those are sub-basins. We mapped the whole country by sub-basin, showing excellent to good conditions and poor conditions, those watersheds that are stressed. We can look at mapping where we should be growing our food. This is a map of the county of Leduc, Alberta, where our airport is. And the red polygons are the quarter sections where we should be growing food. And I could tell you there's only 7 organic farmers in that county, which is, I think, too low. We've mapped things like carbon budgets. We could do these carbon budgets at any resolution, right down to the 500 square meter, and we can map. This is a map of the ability to sequester carbon by the forest, by the different landscapes, by watershed, and the green would be the high carbon absorption watersheds, and the red is where emissions are. There's net emissions. One of the studies I've just completed for Ducks Unlimited is showing these conservation organizations, some of them like Nature Conservancy, which have been working with industry and First Nations, how to actually demonstrate value for the investment in things like wetlands. How does a wetland contribute to societal well-being? How does the employment of people engaged in that industry help to return tax revenues to the government? So this study will soon be released. So it'll set precedent in terms of accounting for natural assets and how to think about natural capital and the returns to natural capital. The fourth form of capital is built capital, which is everything we build. And then finally, the financial capital. Now, the most interesting thing about money is we use the word fiat lux for money. It's a Latin word says to be created out of thin air. In fact, money actually has no inherent value. It has no relationship to things that all the other forms of capital, and most people don't know that. And you don't have to take my word for me. You can go online this afternoon and study this interesting issue. But isn't it interesting, if money has no relationship to anything that's real, then what's the Bank of Canada doing? What are the banks doing? Why aren't we investing in the genuine wealth of our communities? I've had some fun looking at rates of return on income and happiness, and there Sherbrooke, Quebec performs the highest in terms of optimizing self-rated happiness and $10,000 of household income. City of Edmonton, I've shown the chief economist. Here's the red line is the index of well-being for Edmonton, and the blue line is taxes per capita. I'm sorry, no, the blue line is the well-being index, and the red line is taxes, because taxes are always going up, right? But the question is, are we getting value for taxes with respect to well-being? It's an interesting question. So this model I call genuine wealth is based on Bhutan's idea that the ultimate goal of society should be the well-being and happiness of its citizens, that it has to be based on the values that are held by citizens, as expressed, I believe, by elders in our community, and that there are various attributes of well-being. It should be grounded in the science of well-being. And then this ultimately will lead to better decision-making, better strategic planning, better decision-making on things such as LNG. Let me just walk through this. So one of my projects was working with Nunavut, with the Inuit, and helping them design a well-being indicator system that would tie their measures of progress to the Inuit values as expressed by elders, their understanding of their core skills, and social competencies. Another organization I work with is called Wichituan, which means a circle of shared responsibility. It's based in Edmonton, and it unites the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people of Edmonton, about 55,000 strong. And their mission is to make the best use of resources, information, and commitments to find solutions to our challenges and to create opportunities through a circle of shared responsibility. That's a complex map, but this is the roadmap in which we followed. We went and talked to people about what they value. We asked them about their needs. We did an asset assessment of the skills and competencies that were in the community. We looked to them for ideas on improving the well-being conditions, and ultimately the goal was, as a way of accounting to governments as funders, that we could demonstrate a well-being return on investment, if you like. One of the more controversial, maybe go back here. One of the more controversial applications of this, anyone knows about the Tunaha, the Jumbo Glacier project near Panorama, a four-season glacier resort that has been planned and been underway for many years. The Tunaha brought me in and said, "We want you," and I was paid by the BC government, so it was a bit weird. I said, okay, if we use this model, these are the conditions. We talk to the elders. We look at this question of the development of this Jumbo Glacier Resort through the lens of, will it provide a net well-being impact to the community? That's the question. That should be the question of all economic development, in my opinion. If you can't answer that question, if your cost-benefit analysis, if your economist, chief economist, and the BC government can't answer the question, then we should go back to school. So that was, it was hard-hitting. I wasn't very popular with the BC government. But I stood my ground and I said, the Tribal Council expresses its values and I honor that. As an economist, I have no opinion on what they value, but as an analyst of well-being, I can do this analysis with integrity and with honoring the fact that if this project doesn't improve the human, social, cultural, environmental well-being of this community, then it should not go forward. Going backwards here. So I'm going to go forward a bit here. So if I were to look at, now I have to say that I don't have a particular opinion on LNG on this subject. I think about natural capital in the macro sense, and I have to take us all the way back to the first corporations of this country, the Hudson's Bay, the British East Indian Company, Hudson's Bay Company. We've, I believe, had an economic development strategy in this country of believing that we're entitled to export and develop all of the natural resources that were gifts of the Creator, and without any consideration of the environmental liabilities they impose, right? There's no the unfunded liabilities of tailings ponds in Alberta don't sit on anybody's books. They should be on Suncor's books. There should be a bond created, posted to acknowledge the fact that these are unfunded liabilities. So I believe we have to go all the way back to why are we even developing these resources, and what is the goal of exporting these resources to China or any other markets? If we don't answer that question, we've never even engaged in the proper debate. So the first question would be, what are the values that define our well-being? What do we love about our community? What is your genuine wealth? What is the genuine wealth of your community? We can use all kinds of indicators. We can go into conversations, circle dialogue, as we did with Uchitawin, and ask people to articulate what their well-being assets are. We can do personal assessments from that individual person all the way to the community and know that there's also enterprises, businesses that are also hopefully, think about this, what if the corporate charters of Enbridge or these companies actually had well-being written into their legal documents? I'm a professor of corporate social responsibility. I taught it for 10 years. I can tell you that Section 3 of a corporate charter, it's called best interests, is silent. It's not only silent on economic and social and environmental well-being, it's even silent on profit maximization. So that means that we have an opportunity to rewrite corporate charters. Or we need lawyers to think about this, to write well-being into that best interest section of the company. We need a new genuine wealth asset management system that has the goal of optimizing well-being returns on investment. So the questions I'll leave you with this afternoon is LNG development in the best interest of the well-being of current and future generations, 7 generations. And I'm working with an elder now from Coal Lake, Alberta. I went into a sweat with him, and I realized I was actually in the midst of 5 generations, 5 living generations. I said, 7 generations isn't that many, if you think about it. He was holding his great-grandson, and his mother came too. So 7 generations isn't that many generations. Can LNG development be aligned with the best interests of First Nation communities? What if the First Nations communities developed corporations themselves, including investment corporations, that said well-being is the new bottom line by which we govern our affairs? And any company that comes to our land negotiates based on demonstrating there's a well-being return on investment. And if they can't demonstrate it, they should at least acknowledge the risks that we're taking when we take on these development opportunities. And therefore, we have true corporate social responsibility. So I know that your best interests are defined by environment, social, cultural, education, and economic. They fit the 5 capital model. What is the optimum balance of the positive and negative impacts on well-being? Well, I've read in your documents that, yes, there's employment, income, and I put royalties in quotation marks because I bet you're not even thinking about how do you draw royalty from these LNG opportunities. And then there's risks to environment, culture, traditional lifestyles, and health. You know, there's new companies emerging, something called the B Corporation, the Benefit Corporation. There's 500 new companies that have voluntarily signed up to become better corporations with the goal of developing a new economy based on some of these ideas I talked about. Are you getting genuine value for LNG development? What is the expected WROI, the well-being return on investment? Why don't you ask the province to do a WROI analysis of these and see what the economists will say. They might know about social return on investment, which is used in social enterprises, but what about well-being ROI? And what about well-being ROA, well-being return on assets, of the natural assets of the province of British Columbia? Does the province ever account for that? Is it getting its maximum return from royalties, through royalties and taxes from its natural resources? So I believe well-being is the final, maybe the final frontier. In this economy of well-being, it will be defined by households, businesses, and communities that are resilient, flourishing, and joyful places to live and work, where well-being will be the primary mission. I'll leave the last word to John Maynard Keynes, who actually said on his deathbed, if I had to do it all over again, I would have drunk more champagne. Here's the guy that was commissioned by Churchill, Winston Churchill, to actually develop the gross national product, the national income counting system we still use today. He said, the day is not far off. And actually, this is an amazing letter. This is called A Letter to Our Grandchildren. A letter to our grandchildren about the economic possibilities. So he wrote this in 1939, I believe. The day is not far off when the economic problems will take the back seat where it belongs, and the arena of the heart and the head will be reoccupied or occupied by our real problems, the problems of life, of human realities, of creation, of beliefs and religion. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, thank you to Michael and for his presentation. Mark, forgive me. There we go. Just a bit of housekeeping, if I could. We've got the elders gathering room is going to be set up after this session. It's going to be in the breakfast room, so just behind the lobby, the elders gathering. And if you can, elders who want to make their way there, that'll be going on from 1:30 till 4:30. And there's now going to be breakout sessions in the different rooms. Now, this room again is the Marie room. The room to the side is the Scotty room. So I'd encourage you to look in your agenda, find the breakout session that's going to benefit you and your community most, and you can make your way there. You've got a few minutes to do that. But again, the breakout sessions only host 50 people, so you might want to make sure you get a seat by going there a little bit early. The breakout sessions that we've got going, the elders room, that'll be at 1:30. There's a breakout session on communal impacts, and that's in the Marie room. There's one on pipeline safety and spill response in the Kenny room. Advancing your community vision in the board room. Financial management essentials in the Scotty room. Again, that's the room just to my right. Social impact assessments in the Sterling room. So, and another announcement as well, when you're, the sessions are going to be finished by 3:30. If you can gather back in this room again at 5:30, the evening will begin. And there's quite a gala planned for this evening with a reception at 5:30, cocktails served, dinner at 6. And a special keynote speaker will be Calvin Helene. And Calvin is a noted First Nations author, business person, lawyer. So he'll be coming in and speaking, and there's also going to be a real treat. There's a special cultural showcase called Dreamer's Prophecy, directed by Gary Oker, and this evening is sponsored by TransCanada, so we thank the sponsor. There's also another treat as well. Bob Ray, former Premier of Ontario, will be the MC for this evening, so be sure to come back at 5:30 after your sessions. Thank you.